Hello, and welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. Today I'm going to be going over my favorites of the year so far. We're halfway through 2020, and I have read 144 books. This is the most I've read in a very long time, possibly ever in a year, and I am really proud of myself. I've had to change my Goodreads goals a couple times, and I think I'm gonna have to change it again because I originally set it to 100, but then sometime in the spring I realized that I was too close. So then I put it up to 150, but now I'm at 144. So I might bump it up to like 250, maybe even 300. We'll see. Hopefully, my reading habits can be sustainable for the rest of the year. I mean, that's what I'm hoping for. But out of the 144 books that I read, around 15% of it was young adult or middle grade. 33% of it was literary fiction. Maybe 2% of it was romance. 26% of it was fantasy slash sci-fi. And 2% of it was thriller slash horror. And maybe 9% of it was nonfiction. And 3% of it being short story collections. And 6% of it being graphic novels, with finally 4% of them being poetry collections. So, I read pretty diversely in terms of genre for the first half of 2020. I think moving forward, I'm going to try to increase the amount of middle grade and thriller slash horror. I am definitely also planning on reading more nonfiction and short story collections. I'm only going to be able to get through my YA contemporary and literary fiction favorites of the year so far. I'm gonna go through these books in no particular order. These are just the books that I've really enjoyed. And to be honest, I don't really like owning young adult contemporaries because I find that they age out really quickly. So I don't really have physical copies of most of the young adults that I'm going to be talking about, but just know that I really enjoyed them regardless because obviously they're on my favorites of 2020 so far list. The first book I want to talk about is Dig by A.S. King. I thought this was a wonderful mix of fabulism and just teenage realism, and it explores a lot of themes of family and grief and race and class, just like being a high school teenager, but in this really beautifully written way that is not too on the nose, if that makes sense. It's a little bit whimsical. So I definitely recommend this book, and it was my first read of 2020, I believe, and that was a really great way to start off my reading year. I can't wait to get into more of A.S. King's work. Next up, I have my other favorite of the year, Pet by Koike Emeze. This book is a phenomenal young adult middle grade novel that's set in a future where racism, transphobia, patriarchy, and all the systems that are a result of that, like police, prisons, the nuclear family, they're all gone, they're all abolished, and they live in this basically utopian town, but something is going on. And it's a really short novel, like 200 pages, maybe less than that, and it follows this main character who's a teenage trans girl who is going about this adventure. It's not like a fun adventure because she's trying to save her friend and make sure her community is safe. And I thought that this book really had world building that was more ideological than physical, and it was just so beautiful to see fleshed out. My next favorite young adult on this list is On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. This is following an up-and-coming rapper and her attempting to succeed in the rap industry in order to get her family out of poverty. And I thought this book was so beautifully written. Angie Thomas fleshes out characters and their relationships and families and talks about issues that impact real people in this really accessible and friendly way that also makes characters feel like people you would really want to just like hug, you know? So I really enjoyed this book. Next up on this list of my favorites is Her Royal Highness by Rachel Hawkins. This young adult lesbian love story is like a hate to love princess and American girl, like very cute. I liked it. I thought it was a cute, adorable story. So that's why it's on this favorites list. And going along with that, Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, I could not mention this book because to me it feels like a mashup of a dreary smut fanfic and like a Hamilton alternate universe fanfic. Like it has that vibe to it. And I didn't really like the politics or some aspects of the representation, but I thought that it was really cute and it gave me a lot of emotions. I laughed and I cried and I really liked it, just like everyone else. So next up on this list is Beartown by Fredrik Backman. This book is really popular on BookTube and I totally understand why. And it's not that like I enjoyed the process of reading this because it was hard to get through because I don't like sports. I don't care about sports. Team sports, in my opinion, are a waste of time. Anyway, so I like in a story that was centered on a small town that was entirely structured around a hockey team. I was like, okay, whatever. But I'm glad I read this, and it's definitely a favorite of the year so far because I feel like it dealt with that small town, with like the small town politics and the interpersonal strife and harm that can be done between people and the structures that enable it. And I thought that it was fleshed out in a really, really good way that gave all the characters a sense of humanity. The next book is probably my favorite young adult contemporary of the year is The Life in Medieval Times of Kit Sweetly by Jamie Paxton. I will be really surprised if anything tops this book. Anything that I read for the rest of the year tops this book because it's seriously so great. It follows this teenage girl who's a high school senior and she and her family are kind of struggling because her deadbeat dad is being a deadbeat dad and her mom is working like a minimum wage job and she and her brother both work at this castle, like a medieval themed restaurant, and her brother like makes more money because he is one of the jousters like on one of the knights that like fight on their performance nights, and she is merely a wench, meaning like a waitress. And company policy says that only cis men can be knights. So this book is about her combating that sexism within that institution, but also having to deal with figuring out her future. And also there's like this really cute romance with her close friend, and she deals with really real issues of family emergencies, and then she goes viral for being a girl jouster or whatever, and now she's like working to fight this company. But not only is she working to fight this company and like try to keep her job to help her family stay afloat, she's also trying to figure out her future and maintain the relationships and the friends and the friendships that she feel are so important in her life. And this book also deals with beyond just like the corporate gender discrimination stuff. It also talks about like just how corporatism and like working in like retail and the food industry just like sucks so much. And it also talks about how the American healthcare industry also sucks so much. I was super engaged the whole time and I just love this book so much, and I can't wait to get a physical copy because I placed an order for it a while back. My local bookstore has gotten a printing yet. I don't know, but regardless, I thought it was great, and I definitely recommend. Next, and finally, my last contemporary young adult book that has been a favorite of the year so far is Slay by Brittany Morris. I thought that this book did such a good job at talking about why People need spaces away from their oppressors, and also the microaggressions that teenagers kind of end up using against each other. And I thought that it fleshed out the conflict and the characters and built this video game world with such exciting detail. And I thought that the relationships were well fleshed out, and it made me feel a lot of feelings, namely hatred for the main character's boyfriend. If you've read this book, you know what I'm talking about. Let's get into my favorite literary fiction reads of the year so far. I have an extensive list here to get through, so let me try to make this quick. This is, again, in no particular order. I'm literally just pulling this stuff off of a pile. Also, by literary fiction, I'm just kind of gonna mean like adult contemporary and also some like modern classic types. You'll see when I get there. So, the first book is a book that I've read really recently, and that is Real Life by Brandon Taylor. I thought this discussed the reality of being the only Black grad student in your grad program, and the weird kind of romantic relationships and the weird collective just hatred of your life that like students have. I feel like the title just encompasses this book so well. It is about real life and how real life sucks a lot, and people are so complicated and hard to be around. And I thought this book just really detailed that so accurately. This is definitely one of my favorite reads of the year so far. Next up, I have two Toni Morrisons, The Bluest Eye and Beloved. I read Beloved for English class earlier this year, and I thought that its depiction of the impact and trauma of American slavery and the analysis of motherhood and intergenerational trauma was just so masterfully done. I mean, what can I say that hasn't already been said by a million academic peer-reviewed papers and like online critics? This also won the Pulitzer, so like, come on, I think everyone needs to read this book at some point in their life. The Bluest Eye is definitely one of my favorite books of all time at this point. I thought that it painted the picture of this family in this Ohio community and the desire to be desirable in this really gruesome, grotesque, and horrifying way. Passing by Nella Larsen. This book is so phenomenal and it's so short too. And I thought that it depicts relationships and conflict in this really like almost detached way that I found very entertaining to read. And it basically follows this Black woman who can pass as white, and she runs into an old family acquaintance slash friend who is Black, but passes as white, and no one knows she's Black except the main character. And this woman is married to this really racist white man who doesn't know that she is Black. And it's about their kind of fragile and fraught relationship and where that leads them to. It's set in kind of the upper class echelons of Harlem society, and I thought that the setting and this story was just so fascinating. Highly recommend. Really enjoyed this read. Along the same vein as that book, a favorite of the year definitely has to be The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This book follows an almost similar premise to Passing, where there's two main female characters, except in The Vanishing Half they're sisters. One of them goes back to kind of live within the Black community that they grew up in, and one cuts off entirely from her community, her past, and her culture and her identity to assimilate into whiteness, to marry a rich white dude and live out like a more affluent life. And we follow the kind of generational stories of their daughters and how they end up meeting and the different love stories that offshoot from this. And I thought it was so masterful, and just the storytelling was incredible, and it dealt with these themes and emotions and characters with a lot of depth and honesty and insight. I really enjoyed it. Next up, I have Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, another generational story about Black women, mostly. I mean, I think there's some male characters and perspectives in here too. But anyway, this follows within different chapters a different time period and the child of whomever the character was before, kind of. We start out in, I think, West Africa, and then we end up in America. We jump through different eras and locations and identities, and it was just so fascinating to read about and very imaginative and expansive. So really enjoyed this one. Next up, we have Sourdough by Robin Sloan. This book is so quirky and whimsical, but in this really grounded, realistic way. It's about this Silicon Valley tech lady who is like working a grueling job at a tech startup, and then she gets into baking sourdough bread, and that takes her on some unexpected paths. This book is so crazy good, and I'm obsessed with it, and definitely a favorite of the year so far. And if this doesn't end up on my favorites of the year by the end of this year, I'll be really, really surprised. Next up, we have The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This book is set on an island where things keep being disappeared, and collectively the island and the people on it forget that it ever existed. And I thought that this concept was really beautifully fleshed out, and it didn't feel like a cheesy YA dystopian novel that this premise could go in the direction of, but it's much more quiet, and the writing is very sparse, and it feels very mellow, if that makes sense. Next up, we have Nama by Sarah Blake, which is definitely a favorite of the year so far. This could also fall into the fantasy sci-fi genre as opposed to literary fiction, but to me, I read this more as literary fiction as opposed to fantasy/sci-fi. This is basically talking about the story of Noah's Ark from Noah's wife's perspective, and it's very queer, very bizarre, and I think that if you want to know more of my thoughts on it, go check out my review video that I made and put up a couple months back. Next up, we have My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Atessa Moshfegh. This book was so funny in the driest way possible. All of the characters hate their lives, all of the characters are horrible and unlikable to the highest degree, and it deals with mental illness and mental health and isolation in this incredibly weird, interesting, and insightful way. This book is like a very bitchy friend who lives on the Upper West Side of New York, which is kind of what the main character of this book is. So really enjoyed this one, and it's definitely going to be on my 2020 favorites because it's so memorable, and I can't stop thinking about it, even though I read it like literally 4 months ago or 6 months ago. I don't know, time isn't real. I also want to talk about Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, even though I don't have a physical copy of it because I gave it to my friend for her to read, because I really want everyone to read this book, because this book follows girl, woman, and other within Britain, and most of the characters that we follow are Black, or they might not identify as Black. It kind of talks about their stories and their identities and how they intersect and how they perceive each other, and it's done in this deeply realistic way. Like, this is a book where every character and every relationship feels like it exists not just within the boundary of a book. Next up on my list of favorites is Miracle Creek by Angie Kim. This is a courtroom thriller mystery. It's just so memorable. It dealt with the issues of like motherhood and being an immigrant family and the complications of family within that, how mothers treat disabled children, specifically autistic children, and like the idea of like health treatments. I felt like it just was just so crazy and fantastic, and just it left a really deep impact on me. Next up, my third to last favorite on my literary fiction list has got to be Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I thought this book interrogated American suburbs and the duality of like a non-traditional family that is black and a nuclear white family that live basically in the same neighborhood, and like the people in them meeting each other and how they impact each other's lives and how they influence each other, as well as this like criticism and interrogation of white womanhood and of whiteness as like a structure and of like suburbia. And it was done in just such a phenomenal way, and I thought it was so well crafted. Next on my favorites list is The Hike by Drew Magary. I don't know. I'm still trying to find a physical copy of this book because this cover is crazy and I love it. This book is one that you kind of have to go into it not knowing anything, but this is, if I had to pick one like novel, not like a collection or anything, that is my favorite of the year so far, I would probably have to go with this one because it is so crazy and crazy good. Just like look at the cover, what it encompasses, and like read the book. You'll see. It's insane. Finally, I have to talk about Heads of the Colored People by Nafissa Spires Thompson. I've already spoken about this in my wrap-up and my currently reading video that I posted a while back. So I'm not going to get into this one that much more, because if you want to hear me talk about it, you can just check out those videos. But that is all that I have for you today. If you want to hear my fantasy / sci-fi and possibly my thriller, horror, nonfiction, and graphic novel favorites of the year so far, just let me know down in the comments below. I would love to make that video. And thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, you know, all that stupid bullshit. And I will see you in my next video. Goodbye!